Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm so happy you're with us today. Seek Reality began 10 years ago now as just an audio podcast that was focused primarily on seeking and finding the truth about the glorious fact that we really do survive our deaths just fine. And for most people, I have just discovered, I thought that was all we had to do, explain the fact that we do survive our deaths. But for most people, I have just basically discovered that death is still a scary unknown, and I have trouble getting that. I'm amazed to report to you that by recent survey, more than 80% of the people in the world are still afraid to die. So now, of course, we also have seekreality.com, where for the price of just a sandwich per month, you can feast on the endless truth. And that's one very good way for you to get past your fear of death, but there are other ways. And one very different, very positive approach, I think it's also, as I say, very, very positive approach, is something we're going to talk about today. And we have as our guest, all the way from the United Kingdom, to talk about this positive approach of the very delightful Sue Brayne. Sue decided when she survived a light plane crash, imagine surviving a light plane crash, something that finally made her face up to her own mortality, that she decided she wanted to help other people to survive, who had survived their deaths, or even were just thinking about the possibility that they might not survive their deaths. She wanted to help them face up to their mortality in a positive way. So for the past 20 years, she's been doing that. She's been helping people to sort of transform their relationship with death through end-of-life research, workshops, and her books on spirituality, consciousness, and death and dying. Sue Brayne has an MA in the rhetoric and rituals of death. She has a second MA in creative writing. For many years, she worked as a therapist specializing in trauma, end-of-life issues, bereavement, and grief. She currently hosts death cafes, and she focuses on her work as a writer, speaker, and facilitator. And over the past few years, Sue Brayne has become increasingly aware of the shifts and changes that are happening to our planet. This prompted her to write her latest book, which is called Living Fully, The Path to Spiritual Well-Being. She hosts an In Conversation with Sue blog, which focuses on how to live consciously for a better world. And she's even set up the Facebook community called page which is called Living Consciously for a Better World. She's with us today for the third time, and all the way from, across what they call the pond, which is a little bit bigger than a pond. Sue, welcome once again. It's lovely to have you back with us for the third time.
Oh, it's just lovely to be here with you again, Roberta. It's like coming home.
It is. It is a small world we're discovering with the wonders of Zoom. But let's now talk a little bit about what it was that finally made you decide it was time to do this and kind of make the focus of your life teaching people about what comes after this part of life.
Yeah, it's just, I think even as a child, I knew I was going to die. I was always been aware of my mortality right from a very, very small child. It's just been part of my consciousness, really. But the big shift happened for me when I survived the plane crash. And it just brought me up really short about sitting beside the wreckage of the plane, and that both the pilot and I had survived. Goodness knows how we did, because the plane was a complete write-off. But we did. And
how did he was trying to land the plane, and it just...
Oh, yeah, he was a pilot. Yeah, we were 1,500 feet up, and the propeller just stopped going round, and basically we fell out of the sky.
Wow.
What happened for us is that he was brilliant, because he was jettisoning the fuel as we were coming down, sending out Mayday calls. And I just went into, oh my God, this is it. So I started saying goodbye to everybody in my head. And then we were coming into, he was trying to get into a field to land, but there was a row of trees in front of us, and we just hit the trees, and that span us down and splattered us onto the ground. Yeah, and the plane just disintegrated around us because it was a little Cessna, so they're kind of made of balsa wood, really. But it was sitting beside. And I just suddenly, I had this massive realization, like I was living a very, very hedonistic lifestyle at the time, and I didn't know, I was just on the wrong path. And I just had this overwhelming understanding that if I didn't do something to change my life, it would have been better to have died. It was such a powerful thing. And that just completely catapulted me onto my healing journey. And that then led me to all sorts of serendipitous and coincidences started happening around that time. And it was just like the universe went, oh, great, we've got her attention. Right, let's do something.
Her attention, it does do that. It focuses.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it certainly did for me. And I started meeting new people. And then somebody introduced me to the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And then I went and I just got on a plane and went to America, because I just knew I had to go and do her training. And so I did the training, which was the life, death and transition facilitator with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross organization. And that was just so profound. It was such a powerful understanding that there was something so much more than just me here. And I learned a lot about, that how if we don't open up to our spiritual quadrant, she talks about the 4 quadrant, the physical, the emotional, and the mental. But if we don't open up to the 4th quadrant, which is spiritual, we're like a table with 3 legs. We're not stable. And whether you call that religious belief or spiritual belief, for me, it's spiritual belief. And that was just like, that's what I'd been missing all my life. And that's what, up until that moment. And that just started me off on this massive journey back to who I truly was. Yep. And through that, and I did everything from shamanism to, no stone hunter, trained as a psychotherapist as part of my own healing journey, and got very involved in trauma and understanding that, when we're deeply traumatized, it's very hard for us to connect with who we truly are, only because of my own trauma. I had no idea why life was so hard until I started this journey. And then the layers of realization just started to unfold. And I love the way a lot of spiritual teachers talk about, finding out who you are is stripping away the layers of the onion. And there's always another layer. There's always another layer to strip off. We're always going back. Who am I? And you think you've gone back to who you truly are. No, there's more. There's more. So it's just this amazing journey, really, Roberta, that I just found it. I find it. It's just everything to me. Finding out about the human condition and my own journey of the human condition.
It really is remarkable when you begin your spiritual journey. It's like your whole life really opens up. It's almost as if your true life really begins. When you start.
The other thing for me, it opened me up to the magic of being alive. And I stopped. I came off the hamster wheel and all the greasy pole stuff.
That's the hamster wheel. Yes.
It didn't matter. Yeah, and I just think that there is this magic, and I just think the universe for me is absolutely alive, and it speaks to me and helps me, and it sort of guides me along my way all the time. Yes. And it's my job to turn to the universe and work with it. That's
yes. Yes. And isn't that wonderful? And so then you started thinking about how can I help other people begin this journey?
Well, I had a major mystical experience that again this was after the plane crash, a couple of years after. And I know this sounds bizarre, but this is what happened. I was sitting on a train and it felt like the curtains of my forehead parted, and suddenly everything disappeared, and I was floating up into this. I've never experienced love like it. It was, I don't have the language to describe it. And I sense it was very telepathic, this presence beside me, this utter loving presence. And there was no judgment. There was love, but it wasn't the human love that we understand, which is always conditional. This just went beyond it. And it was just the most amazing experience. And I had, and this presence just communicated to me, just said, look, life is only an experience. That's all it is. And it was just like, of course. And so that was massively life-changing for me. Again, as soon as I got the teaching, it was like, the curtains closed and I was back on the train going, what was that? What? So I talk a lot about mystical experiences being in the most prosaic of situations. You can have one walking down the street. You can have one doing the yarning.
You just need to be open to the possibility of it. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know why it happened. I have no idea. I've never
open to it. That's why.
I wasn't even aware that I was, but that's what happened for me. And then I started doing a lot of research into end-of-life experiences and near-death experiences. And when I started reading a lot about near-death experiences, I realized the people that die and then they come back and they tell their story, talk about this love they can't put into words. And it's the same. I had the same experience. It wasn't a near-death experience. It was a mystical experience. But it's the same.
Let's talk about NDEs because you brought them up.
Yes.
People who are here to tell us what happened to them never have actually died. Death is a different experience from an NDE. People who have had an NDE have gone to the astral plane.
Or wherever. Yeah. I mean, you could say that, or wherever.
That's our true eternal home, actually. But what happens then is their silver cord has not been severed. Therefore, they can come back. During an NDE that is extensive, people will often come to a place where they're told, go back. Because if you don't go back, you're approaching where the dead actually are. And if you continue, your silver cord will sever and you will not be able to go back.
Roberta, I don't know about that. I don't, because I really don't know about that. But all I know is that people, and I've done a lot of study into this, have extraordinary experiences, and they are invited to come back.
People believe they've died because it's so different from here.
Yes.
That's the thing. The reason I'm saying this is for people who are watching and who don't know this. We always pause when we're doing these podcasts and these videos to make sure people watching understand that there is a difference. And if you're talking to someone who's had an NDE and they say they've died, always gently remind them that they haven't actually died, because if they had died, they wouldn't be able to come back and talk about it.
But a lot of people come back because they have a mission.
Their silver cord hasn't been severed, fortunately, so they can come tell us about their wonderful experience in the astral plane.
I think Eben Alexander, who is one of the most convincing stories I've ever heard, he's a doctor. And his book, Proof of Heaven, is lovely.
He had a beautiful experience. Some people have awful experiences because their spirit guides are trying to shape them up. And they even believed they were in hell. All they had to say was, help, I'm in hell. And immediately they were out of that experience because they were shaped up by their spirit guide.
I've not experienced that myself.
No, which is a good thing. It's pretty scary.
I think we all have our own experience, don't we, about what it is.
It comes from our spirit guide. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so convinced. I've read so many stories now. I've interviewed so many people about near-death experiences and end-of-life experiences. I'm absolutely convinced life continues after we die. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah.
I don't even believe it. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah. I mean, they're very helpful. They didn't come to us until the first book about NDEs was in 1976. Raymond Moody. I had already done my early research into the afterlife, which was done in the wonderful experiences that were received in the first part of the 20th century, and that was the great period of the great deep trance mediums in the late 19th, early 20th century. And there were wonderful books that you could buy for a few pennies in used bookstores back when I was first doing my research right out of college. And I had convinced myself with 2 years of reading those books that, of course, life continues. It was impossible for it not to be true, because these mediums were working in the southern U.S. and in London and in the environs in your part of the world.
Oh, yeah.
And guess what? All the experiences were the same. I read hundreds of accounts, my dear, and they were having the same experiences, but there were no duplicate reports. How is it possible that the same details, the same process, the same, details of what was happening to these people after their deaths, it was all identical in hundreds of experiences. Now,
it is interesting, the stories. It is.
It's impossible for it to be all the same if it's not real. So I was convinced. I was the biggest skeptic in the world.
I find it very interesting now that the University of Noetic Sciences, they're doing a huge amount of research now into mediumship and into consciousness and into telepathy and what it is. And I find that fascinating, and how it's feeding to a different perception of what life, the cycle of life and death, and what is death? Is it actually a birth into a different form of being? And this, I feel like it really feeds into the Buddhist belief that, when we die, the personality, this is Buddhist, the personality dies, but there is there's an essence of us that continues into this stream of consciousness. And then they believe in reincarnation, that it comes back. Not everybody does, but there's certainly this sense of that we continue after the physical body dies.
Of course we do. There's no question. I mean, the stories that the people who were meeting with, literally through these deep trance mediums, were meeting with their loved ones. And there were people in the room who were recording all of these meetings. It was just unbelievable what was happening, in the 1910s, 1920s, and it was all being recorded because they all believed that the science was going to, at that time, scientists would be investigating all of these accounts. So that was when they thought science would wake up. But of course, what they did instead was to adopt materialism as a fundamental scientific dogma, and they still hold to that dogma to this day.
It is changing, Roberta. There's a lot of research now being done into end-of-life experiences, particularly the whole dying experience, and how people are, there's a lot of evidence now of people, the dying, doesn't happen to everyone, but it certainly happens to a large proportion of people, that they see, inverted commas, somebody who, Peter and I used to call them takeaway, Peter Fenwick and I.
People are doing that research, but mainstream science, you will not see those reports in popular science magazines.
They are beginning. We wrote 6 academic papers, and they did get published in academic journals, which is great.
That's the start. The creationist scientists are all over it, which is beautiful. They're basically trying to prove that, that Jesus was real. They're investigating the Shroud of Turin, all of that kind of Christian scientists. They're all over that. And oh yes, there is abundant scientific proof of the whole process that you and I study about what happens at and after death. There's abundant proof that it's all real, that deathbed visitors are real, that the whole process of death is real. It's beautiful.
I don't think it matters if it's real or it's subjective. What matters is
objectively real.
That the dying person has that experience.
Yes.
It's real to them and it helps them to let go. And that's what matters. They die much more at peace. And it also helps the relatives. I've spoken to a lot of relatives who say, oh, do you know, when my dad or my mum talked about, great Auntie Martha coming to visit them, I just felt, oh, that's wonderful. They're not dying alone. There's somebody with them. And it really helped them in their grieving process. So it's a very beautiful, loving process that can go on.
Yes, yes. And Raymond is writing books about it. At the deathbed visitors came. They went they even sometimes went out of their bodies part of the way with the person who has died. Oh, such beautiful, beautiful stories we're hearing about what happened. And we've got terminal lucidity, and that's being studied. Oh, yes.
Very exciting.
My dear, how beautiful all of this is. What a wonderful time for us to be able to teach all of this.
Well, I think it's just about sharing stories, and that's what the death cafes enable people to do. They enable
talk about death cafes. Tell people what that is all about.
So I don't know if you've got them in the States. You must have, but
I don't know. I'm not part of it, so I'm excited to have you.
Okay. So the Death Cafe movement was started by John Underwood back in 2011, and he just had this vision. He was a Buddhist, and he just wanted to help us all to talk better about death and dying. So he was the first one in the UK to start up a death cafe, which he did with his mum, who she was a psychotherapist, and they started it, the first one in her house in London. And he just brought people together to talk about death. That was all. There's no teaching. There's nothing. It's just take your label off, show up as a human being, and let's talk about what's really important. Let's talk about death and dying. And they are the most amazing spaces to explore your relationship with death and to share your stories with other people who also have shown up to do the same thing. So there's no shutting down. Oh, don't talk about this morbid, or why are you saying that? It's none of that. It's just absolutely everybody shows up to share their stories and their belief systems and their fears even about death and dying. And when they've done that, when they've had when they've heard each other, when they've come together and they've had that conversation, they just go away. You can see people's faces transforming.
Fascinating. So it really helps them to do that.
Yeah. So there's the Death Cafe movement basically started from this one meeting in London, and it's internationalized right across the world. And anybody can start up a death cafe. You've just got to sign up. And if you just go on to, if you want to do that, sign up and you go deathcafe.com, that's the website. And there's it's guidance. There's no rules. The only thing that they ask you not to do is not to sell any products and to own your story. That's the only thing. It's not there as a sales thing or to push your belief system. It's there as a conversation about, let's share our experiences together about end of life and death and dying. So amazing stories come to the Death Cafe. And people will often say, I have never spoken about this before. I've never known where to take this story, or I've always felt embarrassed to say that I had this mystical experience, or this is what happened when I was sitting beside my mum.
This is so fascinating to me, because Craig and I have always, Craig Hogan is sort of my partner in doing this work. We've always thought the only way to help people is for them to know the whole truth. Because, I mean, I'm totally unafraid to die. I've always, I think after I had my experience of light when I was 8 years old, I always knew that there's something eternal going on. But I still was a little bit afraid until I spent those 2 years researching all that old evidence. And then after those 2 years, I said, it's obvious that life goes on. And I never was afraid after that. But Craig also has done a tremendous amount of research. And we always felt that the only way really to get rid of the fear of death was to put all the evidence in one place and give people full access to it. And it takes, really, we thought, we just have to overwhelm people with the evidence. And so we have seekreality.com. We teach people, and when people have told us it takes, you have to really immerse yourself. People who've been through our system say, yeah, after a year or two, I was never afraid again. I get it. I totally get it. You're right. And then they go on happily with their lives, and they communicate with us every so often. So we always felt that was the only way to do it. And so you just have a whole different way to do it. And they don't have to understand that their life is eternal 100%.
In my experience, I mean, when you're learning,
it's a different way to do it.
You have to. I think you can be told anything, but it's about, isn't it? It's about you're only ready to take it on board when you're ready, and that can mean that you're very young and you get it, and you just go, "No, I get this." And some people, they're on the deathbeds and they get it.
Some people are not ready. You're right. Maybe they go to a death cafe and they say, okay, maybe I'm ready to go to seek reality now and really immerse myself in it. But I'm not ready yet. I'm going to go to a death cafe and nibble at it.
Or just share their story. I think that's, for me, it's about being heard, isn't it? It's this sense of other people listening to you and just going, yeah, rather than being closed down or and what I love about Death Cafe is there's no teaching. There's no, I just very, very gently hold the space for any conversation to arise, as long as it's to do with end of life and death and dying.
Right.
And the model is it's a 2-hour conversation. So I run them on Zoom, and I also run them. I used to run them in person. Now I run them on Zoom, and it's just this. You can just see the relief of people going, God, it's okay to say this. I'm not crazy, or I've had this very weird experience. My grandfather died, and he visited me, and at the moment of his death, I felt him sitting on the bed beside me, or I felt, or the phone rang, or all these weird experiences that can happen, these coincidences that can happen, and I've never said this before, but this is what happened. And
I get the emails. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't do cafes, but I sort of am a death cafe, because I at the end of these podcasts, I always invite emails. And so I get them fairly frequently from people who will say, this happened to me. Am I crazy? Because basically they say some variation of that. And I say, no, you're not crazy. This happens a lot to people. That they get that phone call, or and no one's there, or they get that phone call and someone was there, and it's mom who says I'm fine, or whatever.
Or something. The phone. It's sort of like that, the moment of death, and they know that person's dying, and they may be in Australia, and then they know they feel like they've been visited, told, and then the phone goes half an hour later to tell them they've died at the time this person has visited.
Or the person literally appears, and usually they're just high.
Sometimes.
And it was mom, and she was smiling. She didn't speak. I just saw her face, and was I crazy? No, that's common. It happens a lot.
It is common. That's the whole point. It's common, and I think it isn't unusual to have. It's not unusual to have a mystical experience like I did. It's not unusual. We think it is. But it isn't. And if we can just open up to this something more than just me.
They need a place to say that. And so that's what your Death Cafe really is.
I just think I call it when God walks into the room. There's something happens in a death cafe that is, it's magical. It's just delightfully magical. That's all I can say. There's something else happens when people are talking about something that's about so profound about the human condition.
Give me, please, again, it's Death Cafe.
deathcafe.com. And anybody can run a death cafe, but if you want to do it, that's great. But do look at read the criteria first on the deathcafe.com website. It's very clear, the structure of the death cafe. It's really important to understand this is not a teaching thing. It's a facilitation of a space that anybody can come and talk about end of life in any way they want to. There's no pushing of any belief systems or anything like it. It's just, this is what I believe. And somebody might say, well, actually, this is what I believe. No right, no wrong. That's just the conversation.
But if you've had experiences that you wish you could share with someone, what a great place to get validated that other people may have had similar experiences, and you can. I think that's a great thing. That's really great. I never really understood what they were. I've heard of them, of course, and so that's great. That's a great thing. And I read your book. I think your book is delightful, and it's not too long. We all love shorter books. It's a great place to kind of also sort of get some of your beliefs and experiences a little bit validated so that you can begin to grow and grow into that space. My first book in this space was The Fun of Dying, which is a very good book to read if you're in a crisis situation, especially because people who suddenly need to learn a lot about death tell me that they read it and it kind of made so much sense to them quickly, which they needed. Suddenly they had someone who was dying and they needed to understand a lot of stuff quickly. The Fun of Dying is very good for that. And it has enough background information that you can read later that helps you to fill in that space too. But there are a lot of good books. There's a lot of good information that in this field. You don't need to be ignorant about death, and you certainly should not be ignorant about death. I think I have been deficient in teaching about death just because it's an area where, since I don't have any fear at all, I forget.
People might be interested. I did a TEDx talk about wearing your mortality with pride, and you can, if you look me up, Sue Brayne, on the TEDx, it's TEDx Talks. That might also be something that people might be interested in, is just looking at the importance of living until we die. That death is, mortality isn't about death. It's about life. So as I said, people might be interested in listening. It's 12 minutes long or something, 14 minutes long.
And her last name is spelled Brayne. Good to know.
Brayne, yes.
And that's her website too.
My website is suebrayne.co.uk.
All of this will be, by the way, with the materials for this episode, so that you don't have to worry and drive off the road as you listen. I always worry about that. So this will all be with the materials for this episode, so you don't have to worry about that. Well, we're coming toward the end of our time. What do you want people to know based on what we've said today? Because we've talked about a lot of things. I didn't know how many people are still afraid of death. This is something you deal with, but I haven't been dealing with it very well.
What I would say to anybody these days is just find ways to embrace your mortality. you are going to die. That is guaranteed. You were born and you are going to die, and we never know when that's going to happen. When the clock runs out, that's your time. So, it's just about making the very best of the time that you have. And if you're struggling, please find help. That's all you need to do, is reach out. There will be somebody there for you to help you along your journey. But I say that to everybody now, is just embrace your mortality and just live the best you possibly can with who you are and the circumstances that you find yourself in. And I just give grateful thanks every day. Every day.
You give thanks for what? For each moment of life? Or
just being here, waking up in the morning, not being in pain, or the fact I'm in a warm bed. I have, my house, my age. I've just turned 70. That kind of thing. I'm just so grateful just to have this time to be conscious of being so alive, especially in these times of monumental change across the planet. And we don't know how that's going to unfold. We don't. But, it's about being as present as we possibly can be. And I just believe in feeding the zeitgeist with as much positivity as I possibly can. And that, I feel, is my job, is to age and die as well as I can. And to die, I want to die consciously. I want to be really present when I die. So I look at that as my next step, my next dying. This is, I've gone down I'm going down the slopey hill towards, but for me, it's like another adventure. It isn't an ending for me. That's what I believe. It's another amazing adventure that I'm going to be stepping into when my time comes.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for being with us, my dear. So happy to have you here, and we'll have you back. And I think you're now going to be our expert on this, since I'm a pretty lousy expert on death. It's something I never think about. I'm not familiar with. I think about life all the time, but I never think about death, and I don't teach about it. I should. I really should. And I appreciate very much you're looking at that side of it for me. Thank you. Big hug. And everyone, again, we've come to the end of our time. This has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. I'm so happy you could be with us today. Please never forget, you are a powerful, eternal being. You never began, you never will end. And when you really get what that means, it changes everything in your life for the better. Next week, our guests will be Carol and Mikey Morgan, and they're going to be with us for the 21st time. I think by now, most people who are used to Seek Reality as part of your lives know Mikey's story. He's a genuine sixth-level being who last lived on Earth in the 1600s, and he became so concerned about the way things are going on Earth, pretty awkwardly, I think, at this point. He took a voluntary, completely optional Earth lifetime, and he became a hero by doing it. That ended in 2007 when he was only 20, so he could teach us and answer our questions with the help of his mother, Carol. And when I first heard Mikey's story in 2011, I did not believe him for 1 minute. No siree. I have tested Mikey, though, exhaustively over the past dozen years, and through hundreds of questions, he's never made a single mistake. In fact, he often, when he answers my questions, takes me a little bit farther and answers some question I wasn't sure about the answer to. He clearly knows a lot more than I do, and I have spent 50 years researching the afterlife. So we are delighted, and I have to say we are highly honored to have Mikey as our Seek Reality guest fairly often now. I'm amazed that he is willing to come and be our guest repeatedly. And whenever you think of a question you'd like to ask Mikey, you just Send it to me through the green contact block. And as I say, I am honored that Mikey is willing to come and answer his questions here. Again, he will be with us next week. Sooner or later, he'll find a bigger venue, but until then, he is willing to come and be our guest. Please be sure to join us next week. These visits from Carol and Mikey are always a lot of fun. He laughs with us, but every time he comes and acts like a little kid, he just to understand this is a very, very big star. Once I asked Thomas how far above him, and he's a fifth level being, Mikey actually is, and he said, well, where I'm standing right about now in the afterlife, I can look up and I can see a star far above me, and that's about where Mikey is. So I have to tell you, I'm kind of amazed he's still willing to talk to us. This week, Sue Brayne has been with us for the third time. Sue has an MA in the Rhetoric and Rituals of Death. She hosts several death cafes each year. And now I know what a death cafe is. I think it's a great thing. Her most recent book is Living Fully, Dying Consciously, The Path to Spiritual Well-Being. And we don't talk much about the D word here on Seek Reality, but we should, because at this point, death is such a natural and joyous continuation of this life for me that I just assume that everyone must see it as I do, but apparently I'm wrong about that. So today, Sue Brayne has helped to take us back to where our Seek Reality roots are 10 years ago. For those who still see death as in any way fearful, I've been talking here with someone who really knows what she's talking about, and we're very grateful to her for helping us with that. I think that I was thinking as she was giving us what she's grateful for, and what am I grateful for? What I'm most grateful for is the opportunity to give you what I've been given, which is the right, the joy, to give you each week what God has given me the opportunity to do, which is to answer the questions I've spent my life asking him. And he's given me those answers directly through the Lord, the risen Christ. And I am giving you as truly as I possibly can the answers that Jesus has given me. And every answer that I give you is an answer that Jesus has given me directly. And that's what I'm most grateful for. And one thing I should perhaps mention to you now is that after 10 years of my saying that Seek Reality is only audio because your host, as you can see, has a great face for radio, this is our second Seek Reality audio and video podcast. And we have bowed to the inevitable, yes, and joined the modern era. And I promise to try to grow old, at least somewhat presentably. I actually have put on lipstick and combed my hair. And now, of course, it's also time once again to mention that Seek Reality Online is your one-stop resource for all things afterlife. Just go to seekreality.com and start to learn for yourself that your own reality really and truly is eternal. Learn the ultimate truth from Craig Hogan, who's your ultimate worldwide expert. I'm not. He is on all things afterlife. And teachingsbyjesus.com is its new sister website and your single resource for all the beautiful divine truths that are brought to us in perfect love by the greatest teacher of all, Master Jesus, the eternally risen Christ. Now it really is Jesus's turn. Christianity, the religion that was created by the Roman Emperor Constantine and not by Jesus, finally is dying. So the genuine teachings of Jesus can at last come alive. Teachingsbyjesus.com is the Lord's own entirely religion-free website, made by Jesus in perfect love for you. Also, most of you, I think, know by now that my nonfiction books are Liberating Jesus, My Thomas, The Fun of Dying, The Fun of Staying in Touch, The Fun of Growing Forever, The Fun of Living Together, and The Fun of Loving Jesus, embracing the Christianity that Jesus taught. It's about time. For young children, there's The Fun of Meeting Jesus, and you can order all these books through bookstores or on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and most of all, the adult books are also available as audiobooks, all but the last one, and I'll get around to doing that one too. If you want to talk about anything at all, just contact me through the green contact block on robertagrimes.com. I do answer every email, but I get so many that it can take me a couple of weeks at this point. Just Please give me your correct email address, because if you don't, you're never going to get an answer, because sometimes my emails bounce. I'll try twice, but if you truly give me your wrong email address, you'll never get an answer. I'm so sorry. All of the more than 500 past episodes of Seek Reality in audio are available to you wherever audio podcasts can be found, and you can listen to new episodes in audio each week with the Seek Reality app that you can find for free wherever apps are available. And meanwhile, this has been Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Please enjoy and make the most of this coming week in our one sacred reality, always knowing that you are a powerful, eternal being, and you, most of all in this whole universe, you are infinitely, eternally, and perfectly loved.
You've been listening to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Roberta blogs and answers questions at robertagrimes.com. Join us every week as we explore what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about the one reality we all share. Knowing the truth changes everything.